Add that up and compare it to what the ethanol industry has gotten over the last about 30 years, and you will see that the oil companies have gotten a lot more than what ethanol has ever received from the government. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I rise in support of my amendment. I would ask unanimous consent to speak as a morning business on the issue of Libya before I do.
Without objection.
Madam President, yesterday the administration made an announcement that I believe will strike most of my colleagues and the Americans they represent as a confusing breach of common sense. Two administration lawyers claimed that U.S. military involvement in Libya is not in breach or calls for a war powers resolution. In other words, they believe that our military activities in Libya do not require a war powers resolution, and they say because the United States is not engaged in a state of hostilities in Libya. This puzzling assertion seems to be undercut by the very report that the administration sent to Congress yesterday, which makes it clear that the U.S. Armed Forces have been and presumably will continue to fly limited strike missions to suppress enemy air defenses, to operate armed predator drones that are attacking Gaddafi's forces in an effort to protect Libyan civilians, and to provide the overwhelming support for NATO operations, from intelligence to aerial refueling. Now, I agree that actions like these don't amount to a full-scale state of war, but I would certainly grant that I am no legal scholar, but I find it hard to swallow that U.S. Armed Forces dropping bombs and killing enemy personnel in a foreign country doesn't amount to a state of hostilities. Unfortunately, this only adds more confusion to our already confusing policy in Libya. Our policy objective, as stated by the President correctly, is to compel Gaddafi to relinquish power, and yet that is not our military objective. The administration claims to have turned the operation in Libya over to NATO, an alliance in which the United States makes up 3/4 of the collective defense spending, as Secretary Gates recently pointed out. The administration sought the blessing of the United Nations, the Arab League, and NATO before using force in Libya, but still has not sought a similar authorization or statement approval from the elected representatives of the American people. That's wrong. The result of all this, I hate to say, is plain to see in the actions of our colleagues on the other side of the Capitol, in the House. There's massive and growing opposition to continuing the U.S. involvement in Libya. There's already been one piece of legislation passed that binds the President's authority as Commander-in-Chief, and there could likely be a vote soon to cut off funding for the entire operation. In short, the accumulated consequences of all this delay, confusion, and obfuscation has been a wholesale revolt in Congress against the administration's policy. I take no pleasure in pointing this out, because though I have disagreed, and disagreed strongly at times, with aspects of the administration's policy in Libya, I believe the President did the right thing by intervening to stop a looming humanitarian disaster in Libya. Gaddafi was at the gates of Benghazi. Amid all of our present arguments about legal and constitutional interpretations, we can't forget the main point. In the midst of the most groundbreaking geopolitical event in 2 decades, as peaceful protests for democracy were sweeping the Middle East, with Gaddafi's forces ready to strike at the gates of Benghazi, and with Arabs and Muslims in Libya and across the region pleading for the U.S. military to stop the bloodshed, the United States and our allies took action and prevented the massacre that Gaddafi had promised to commit in a city of 700,000 people. And by doing so, we began creating conditions that are increasing the pressure on Gaddafi to give up power. Yes, the progress towards this goal has been slower than many had hoped, and the administration is doing less to achieve it than I and others would like. But the bottom line is this: we are succeeding. Gaddafi is weakening. His military leaders and closest associates are abandoning him. NATO is increasing the tempo of its operations and degrading Gaddafi's military capabilities and command and control. The Transitional National Council is gaining international recognition and support and performing more effectively. And though their progress is uneven, opposition forces in Libya are making strategic gains on the ground. I know that many were opposed to this mission from the very beginning, and I respect their convictions. But the fact is, whether people like it or not, we are engaged in Libya and we are succeeding. So I would ask my colleagues, is this the time for Congress to begin turning against this policy? Is this the time to ride to the rescue of the man who President Reagan called the mad dog of the Middle East? Is this the time for Congress to declare to the world, to Gaddafi and his inner circle, to all of the Libyans who are sacrificing to force Gaddafi from power, and to our NATO allies who are carrying a far heavier burden in this military operation than we are? Is this the time for America to tell all of these different audiences that our heart's not in this, that we have neither the will nor the capability to see this mission through, that we will abandon our closest friends and allies on a whim? These are questions that every member of Congress needs to think about long and hard, but especially my Republican colleagues. Many of us remember well the way that some of our friends on the other side of the aisle savaged President Bush over the Iraq War, how they sought to do everything in their power to tie his hands and pull America out of that conflict with far too little care for the consequences that their actions would have on our friends, our allies, our interests, and our moral standing as the world's leading power. We were right to condemn this behavior then, and we would be wrong to practice it now ourselves simply because a leader of the opposite party occupies the White House. Last week, Gaddafi wrote a personal letter of thanks, a letter of thanks to the members of Congress who voted to censure the president and end our nation's involvement in Libya. Republicans need to ask themselves whether they want to be part of a group who are earning the grateful thanks of a murderous tyrant for trying to limit an American president's ability to force that tyrant to leave power. The goal for all of us here in this body, Democrats and Republican alike, should not be to cut and run from Libya, but to ensure that we succeed. In the very near future, Senator Kerry and I, along with a strong and senior bipartisan group of our colleagues, will introduce an authorization for the limited use of military force in Libya. The administration may assert that we are not engaged in hostilities in Libya, but the Senate should go on record as authorizing these operations. We are in a state of hostilities, and the only result of further delay and confusion over Congress's role in this debate will be to continue ceding the initiative to the strongest critics of our actions in Libya. We plan to introduce this authorization soon, and I would urge the majority leader to schedule a vote on it quickly. The Senate has been silent for too long on our military involvement in Libya. It's time for the Senate to speak. And when that time comes, I believe we'll find a strong bipartisan majority that is in favor of maintaining our current course in Libya, that supports us seeing this mission through to success, and that is willing to continue standing in the breach with our allies until the job is done. Now, Madam President, the Amendment 411 would prohibit the U.S. Department of Agriculture from funding the construction of ethanol blender pumps or ethanol storage facilities, the latest request from the ethanol lobby. By prohibiting funding for these pumps and storage facilities, we will prevent American taxpayers from spending over $20 billion to convert the 20,000 gasoline pumps currently under construction. $20 billion. During today's cloture vote on the ethanol tax credit amendment, some members that voted against cloture cited concerns with the procedural tactics used to bring up the vote, the unfairness of ending the subsidy in mid-year, therefore pulling the rug out from underneath the ethanol industry, and that it was somehow premature to end over 30 years of subsidies unless it was coupled with further funding for ethanol infrastructure construction. I hope my fellow critics of the ethanol tax credit have taken notice of this new tactic over the past few weeks. For ethanol supporters, this debate has been about where and how to prop up the industry in the future, not whether or not the ethanol industry deserves future taxpayer support. It's time to say enough is enough. This industry has been collecting corporate welfare for far, far too long. For those of us that have been fighting against these handouts over the last 2 decades, it's been far too long since we've had a full debate on this issue. As a reminder to some of my colleagues of how this debate in support of corn ethanol handouts has shifted over the years, I'd like to read a portion of a floor statement on ethanol subsidies that I delivered on March 11, 1998. I said, Mr. President, let me just take a moment to try to explain why we have such generous ethanol subsidies in law today. The rationale for ethanol subsidies has changed over the years, but unfortunately, ethanol has never lived up to the claims of any of its diverse proponents. In the late 1970s, during the energy crisis, ethanol was supposed to help the U.S. lessen its reliance on oil. But ethanol use never took off, even when the gasoline prices were highest and lines were longest. Then in the early 1980s, ethanol subsidies were used to prop up America's struggling corn farmers. Unfortunately, the usual trickle-down effect of agricultural subsidies is clearly evident. Beef and dairy farmers, for example, have to pay a higher price for feed corn, which is then passed on in the form of higher prices for meat and milk. The average consumer ends up paying the cost of ethanol subsidies in the grocery store. By the late 1980s, ethanol became the environmentally correct alternative fuel. Unfortunately, the Department of Energy has provided statistics showing that it takes more energy to produce a gallon of ethanol than the amount of energy that a gallon of ethanol contains. In addition, the Congressional Research Service, the Congressional Budget Office, and the Department of Energy all acknowledge that the environmental benefits of ethanol use, at least in terms of smog reduction, are yet unproven. These facts are as true today as they were 13 years ago. In fact, we now have a better understanding of the negative effects corn ethanol has on both the environment and food prices than we did 13 years ago. But it's important to note that while attention is being paid, and rightly so, to eliminating the unneeded and wasteful ethanol tax credit, the corn ethanol lobby is seeking a new ethanol stimulus package by attempting a congressional runaround to continue bilking American taxpayers out of their money. Instead of seeking approval from Congress, lobbyists have convinced the Department of Agriculture to change the rules of the Rural Energy for America program to pay for new gas station pumps at retail stations at the expense of solar, wind, and energy efficiency projects. In fact, the President has announced his goal to fund the construction of 10,000 ethanol blender pumps and tanks within the next 5 years, a down payment on future ethanol stimulus spending. Supporters of ethanol corporate welfare are happy to tell you that if they get their way, these 10,000 blender pumps and tanks will be the tip of the iceberg for billions in new federally funded corn ethanol infrastructure development. To be perfectly clear, not content with government support to subsidize ethanol, protect it from competition, or require its use, lobbyists now want American taxpayers to pay for the construction of pumps and holding tanks at retail gas stations. Of course, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is happy to comply with the industry's requests to fund infrastructure construction. On April 8, 2011, Secretary Vilsack issued a rule that would classify blender pumps as a renewable energy system, qualifying it for funding under Rural Energy Assistance Program. When Congress created the Rural Energy Assistance Program, it had no intention of paying gas station owners to upgrade their infrastructure, further subsidizing the ethanol industry. Furthermore, as a bonus to any gas station owners to take advantage of the grant program, once the federal government has built the blending pumps, holding tanks, retailers will be eligible to receive the ethanol tax credit, double dipping in the federal treasury. How expensive will this ethanol stimulus be if the special interest lobby gets its way? According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an ethanol blender pump and tank cost an average of $100,000 to $120,000 to install. With over 200,000 fuel pumps currently operating in the U.S., it would cost over $20 billion to convert them all. This is one stimulus project that we can't afford. As for those concerned about the lack of support for wind and solar projects, a recent Congressional Research Service report indicates the tax credits and subsidies for solar, wind, and geothermal power will cost $8.62 billion from 2008 to 2012. The ethanol tax credit alone would cost over 3 times more, $26.5 billion, allowing the Rural Energy for America program to continue funding blender pumps and tanks will only continue this trend. For my colleagues that really wanted to end the corporate welfare handouts to the corn ethanol industry, but were concerned over the process issues surrounding the ethanol tax credit vote, are concerned about the fairness of ending the tax credit in mid-year, you can rest assured that those concerns do not apply to this amendment. It's time Congress took a step towards ending unneeded and unnecessary payouts to a robust and strong industry. In a time of fiscal constraint, when all are being asked to make a sacrifice, we should expect more from leaders in the private sector than seeking to continue handouts for stimulus projects from the federal government. Madam President, I was disappointed, obviously, in the vote that we took concerning the ethanol subsidies, and I know probably what the vote on this amendment will turn out. The message is, Americans, we're really not serious. We're really not serious about heeding the mandate of last November to stop spending, to stop wasteful projects, to stop the unnecessary projects such as ethanol subsidies. We're going to go out and we're going to spend $20 billion of your tax dollars in your local gas station to install a pump. My friends, no wonder the American people, according to recent polls, are disillusioned, disappointed, and pessimistic about our future. This vote on this amendment will confirm an ample and adequate reason and understandable reason for that pessimism. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Conklin. objection.
Madam President, I know we're scheduled to have 2 votes around 2 o'clock today on the ethanol issue. Once we're past those amendments, we have a number of other important issues to be debated and hopefully scheduled for votes. Senator Hutchinson, for example, has one on health care lawsuits, Senator Portman on unfunded mandates, Senator Brown on withholding payments, Senator DeMint has an amendment on the death tax and the renewable fuel standards. In addition, our ranking member and manager, Senator Inhofe, has a couple of amendments as well. I'll be talking to the Majority Leader during the next vote to see how we can begin to schedule votes on these and other amendments that may need to be considered before we move to final passage. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Kaka.
Madam President, are we in a quorum call? Move unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I arrived today to speak to the McCain Amendment. I noticed my colleague from Arizona was just on the floor, and I wanted to say that I appreciate him offering this amendment, and as with the Coburn Feinstein Amendment, I support his amendment. I also wanted to make reference to the comments he had made regarding our conflict in Libya. I agree with him, these are my words, that it's bizarre that the administration has sent over a letter yesterday referring to the fact that we're not involved in hostilities in Libya. I mean, it's really totally bizarre when you look at what is going on in the air in Libya right now. So I have no idea why Mr. Coe would have offered this argument. I know we're going to have a hearing in Foreign Relations in the next couple of weeks, thankfully, to look at this issue. But thirdly, I'd like to point out that one of the reasons that we're in this situation right now where Congress has not authorized anything is the administration. I sent a letter to the administration, Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton 9 weeks ago, Madam President, just asking 5 questions about our engagement in Libya, 5 questions. And I received last week a letter from an acting assistant secretary that gave me a half answer on one of those 5 questions. I think most people in this body are aware that Senator Webb and I then authored a resolution asking 21 questions of the administration regarding Libya. I thank them for yesterday transmitting to us some information on Libya We haven't yet gotten access to the classified versions of it. We have, obviously, like everyone else here, I'm sure, read the unclassified version, but I think the reason we find ourselves in the place that we are is we just haven't been able to get information from the administration regarding this conflict. So I know the senator from Arizona and the senator from Massachusetts are working on an authorization request, a limited authorization. I hope that they will potentially wait until we have the answers to all 21 questions, the same questions that many of the House members wanted the answer to. But I share with him the frustration that Congress has not taken any action on this, and would say I'm just really stunned by the fact that the administration has chosen not to give responses to questions until yesterday. And really this was done in request to, I know, what they saw was a movement in Congress just wondering why in the world they would be so resistant to answering basic questions regarding a conflict. But then secondarily, again, just the bizarre answer that we are not involved in hostilities. I mean, you know, you cannot tell senators one thing in private, the same senators, and tell them something else in public and expect senators to feel any degree of credibility regarding those statements. So I thank the senator from Arizona for the comments that he has made. We've had an amicable relationship regarding this discussion. We have had like thoughts on several aspects of this conflict, and we've had probably some differing thoughts, but I'm here today to say that I agree with him that his amendment is an amendment that needs to be passed. I agree with him that it's incredible that we have not acted as a Congress, and I would say the big reason for that is just the lack of information. For some reason, the administration has gone to seek approval from the United Nations, but has not shown any desire to seek approval from Congress. It's just, again, odd. And then thirdly, just the whole bizarre nature of this administration saying that what we're doing there does not involve hostilities, when in their unclassified version that the whole world has the ability to see, there's no way that the engagements that they have said in an unclassified document are occurring in Libya do not involve hostilities. That's just absolutely, categorically not possible. So, Madam President, I do hope that very, very soon Congress will take action. I hope all of the answers that we've asked, all the questions we've asked answers to have been answered, and I think all of us will know that very soon when we actually gain access to the classified versions of what has been sent over. So with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. And I notice a senator from Minnesota.
Very good. Madam President,
The senator from Minnesota.
I see I'm joined by the senator from Iowa, who I know will speak shortly and has been a leader in biofuels and in energy for many, many years. Madam President, I rise today to speak about the votes we will be having later today on the amendments that would immediately cut off support for our homegrown energy industry with, I guess, a few days' notice. I don't think there's precedent for this. A decision, if this were to ultimately pass, I'm not certain this is the vehicle that would allow it to go into law, but if it would pass, we would have made a decision that is different than the decision that was made in January affecting an industry that employs nearly 500,000 people. I want to talk about the amendment today offered by my friend, the senator from California. And I would say first, Madam President, if we were voting twice on an amendment in just a few days, it would be something that creates jobs or decreases our dependence on foreign oil. But that is not the case here. We're talking about pulling the rug out from an industry that provides 10% of the nation's fuel supply and supports nearly 500,000 jobs. I don't think people quite understand that about biofuels. I think they think it's some boutique industry, 10% of our nation's fuel supply at a time when gas is up near $4 a gallon. Madam President, we know that there is support for phasing out the current ethanol tax credits. We know that. I have a bill to do that. Senator Grassley has another bill to do that. We understand that at a time when our country is facing severe budget constraints. But the question, Madam President, is not if we should do it. We will. It is when and how. We all know that homegrown energy has played an important part in reducing our dependence on foreign oil and supported thousands of jobs in this country. We also know that as we continue to move our nation toward energy independence, by the way, we actually are moving up in terms of our own energy independence, which is a goal that I believe every member strongly supports, and that is that homegrown energy will be a significant part of our solution. We need a glide path and not a cliff for the only alternative to oil. Immediately ending all support for the biofuels industry, as the amendments we're considering propose to do, would stifle investment in not only the existing ethanol industry, but also the newly developed cellulosic, yes, that's part of this, cellulosic, algae, and the next generation of biofuels, which I think holds the most hope for this country. In fact, many of the first advanced biofuels plants are co-located with corn ethanol plants. You can't promote next-generation fuels by ending a tax policy for existing biofuels 6 months into a one-year extension with only a few days' notice. So again, the real debate is not about whether we end this tax credit. We know we should do it, and we also, I believe, we should do it with oil, too. But right now we're on biofuels. It's about how we do it. That's why the senator from South Dakota, Senator Thune, and I continue to work towards a bipartisan compromise that would reduce our deficit and offer a reasonable way to reform the biofuels industry and achieve significant deficit savings immediately. And I appreciate our colleagues talking to us. We've had many meetings, and we are working very hard to get this done. We need to work toward a pragmatic solution that reforms the ethanol industry without harming jobs or driving up gas prices at a time when gas is over $3.70 a gallon. An article in the Chicago Tribune underscored the fact that if we cease to produce the 13 billion gallons of ethanol that we make every year, it would drive up prices at the pump by as much as $1.40 per gallon in the short term. Does the Senate actually think we can afford to raise gas prices by $1.40 per gallon? Do my colleagues think we can afford $5 per gallon gas? I look forward to working with my colleagues on a more responsible option that will reduce the deficit and not suddenly disrupt an industry that supports $3 billion in economic activity in my state alone. Madam President, I also want to say a few words in opposition to the amendment offered by my friend from Arizona, Senator McCain. Our current policies provide incentives for many different kinds of fuel dispensing technologies, from hydrogen to natural gas to electric hookups to ethanol. But the McCain Amendment singles out only biofuel blender pumps and proposes to cut all incentives for investments in these pumps at a time when we need to be expanding our fuel supply options, not limiting them to oil from Saudi Arabia. We should be investing in the farmers and the workers of the Midwest and not the oil cartels of the Mideast. But what the McCain Amendment does is focus on limiting those blender fuel pumps. Blender pumps don't require customers to use ethanol. That's why they're blender pumps. They simply give consumers a choice at the pump and help lower gas prices for all consumers, even those who don't use the higher blends of ethanol. From 2000 to 2010, competition from ethanol reduced wholesale gasoline prices by an average of 25% per gallon, saving American consumers an average of $34.5 billion annually. During the gasoline price run-up in 2010, the impact of ethanol on gasoline prices was substantially larger, reducing gasoline prices by a national average of 89 cents per gallon. Giving consumers a choice of using higher blends of renewable fuel has allowed Brazil, the country of Brazil, to become energy independent. And we can do the same here. The McCain Amendment also would do more than limit consumers' options at the pump. I know North Carolina, Madam President, is a good military state. This would prohibit the U.S. military from constructing blender pumps or storage tanks that can use more fuels that would be more resilient in case of a fuel supply cutoff from OPEC or other disruptions in the global fuel supply. Our dependence on foreign oil has been widely recognized by our military and diplomatic leaders as a major strategic vulnerability. To respond to this, we have taken important steps in recent years to encourage U.S. government and military fleet vehicles to be fuel flexible as part of our efforts to reduce both our spending on fuel and our dependence on foreign oil. Shouldn't we allow our homegrown ethanol to compete with foreign oil to fuel these vehicles? So I urge my colleagues to oppose the McCain Amendment. At a time when families and businesses across the nation are battling high fuel costs, we should be giving them more options at the pump, not less. Madam President, today's votes on the Feinstein Amendment and the McCain Amendment are part of a process. We all know it's not the final result. While I strongly oppose both amendments, I also know that regardless of the outcome today, or even the outcome on that vote 2 days ago, we still have work to do. I appreciate the willingness of the Senator from California and the Senator from Oklahoma to continue to negotiate with Senator Thune and myself. These are serious, ongoing negotiations. I am hopeful that in the coming days we can reach a bipartisan compromise that isn't just about one amendment on a bill that is not the vehicle where we can get this done, but in fact we actually have a bipartisan compromise that balances our need to continue to support homegrown biofuels with our need to reduce our deficit, and to do this in a way that actually puts money right now back to our government to pay off this debt. With that, I see Senator Grassley, who knows a little bit about finances with his major role on the Finance Committee, and also as a farmer, a little bit about the biofuels industry. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
The Senator from Iowa.
I compliment Senator Klobuchar on her leadership in trying to find, first of all, leadership in supporting biofuels and alternative energy, but also working real hard the last few weeks to find a compromise here on this issue that is a very difficult issue and very divisive here within the United States Senate. So we're voting at 2 o'clock today on these amendments that Senator Klobuchar has already referred to. The first is an amendment by Senators Feinstein and Coburn repealing the incentive for domestically produced ethanol, and I emphasize domestically produced, because we don't have to worry about oil sheiks robbing us of all of our resources when you burn ethanol, like you do when you burn imported gasoline. The second amendment is offered by Senator McCain, prohibiting the U.S. Department of Agriculture from using funds for the installation of blender pumps. These amendments won't lower the price of gasoline at the pump. That's what people today are concerned about, the price of gas at the pump. These amendments won't lessen our dependence upon foreign oil. We spend $835 million every day importing oil. And these amendments won't create a single job in the United States. In fact, they'll do just the opposite. They'll raise the price of gasoline, make us more dependent on foreign oil, and it won't create a single job. Most importantly, these amendments also won't save the taxpayers any money because they stand little chance of being enacted. Even if the amendments were to pass today, they won't get out of this chamber because of our Constitution that says that revenue measures must originate in the House of Representatives. So when this bill, if it passed the Senate, goes to the House, they're going to reject it, or they use the term blue slip this bill, and it's going to come back to the Senate. So this bill, with these amendments, is dead on arrival in the other body. It's also dead on arrival at the White House. We've had indications in a statement that President Obama opposes repealing the incentives and is open to new approaches that meets today's challenges and to save taxpayers money. And I remember one of the first policy discussions that I had with then new Senator Obama. I was chairman of the Finance Committee. He came up and we talked about what we could do working together to promote ethanol as an alternative energy. And his idea was incorporated in a piece of legislation that became law. And I was glad to work with him on that. So I thank President Obama for the statement that he recently gave, again now as President of the United States, supporting alternative energies, biofuels, and in this case specifically ethanol. The votes at 2 o'clock then are a fruitless exercise. So, to a sense, you're in political theater here as we debate these issues. We've already had this vote, and it was defeated 40 to 59. Now, everybody knows that oil is now hovering near $100 a barrel, and everybody knows, as you hear once a month or maybe reminded every day, that unemployment is 9.1%. So why is the Senate taking a full week and voting twice on the same amendment that will increase prices at the pump, increase dependence upon foreign oil, and lead to job loss, or at least do nothing about the unemployment rate? We should be having this debate in the context of a comprehensive energy plan. This debate should include a review of the subsidies for all energy production, not just singling out ethanol. Nearly every type of energy gets some market-distorting subsidy from the federal government. An honest energy debate should include ethanol, oil, natural gas, nuclear, hydropower, wind, solar, biomass, and probably a lot of other alternative energies that I don't think of right now. By discussing it in the context of an overall energy policy, instead of singling out ethanol right now, you would be able to then make sure that you have a level playing field for all forms of energy, because the government shouldn't be choosing between petroleum and alternative energy, as an example. When the oil and gas subsidies were targeted, as the ethanol subsidy is being targeted right now, and oil and gas subsidies were targeted last month, the president of the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association had this to say, quote, "Targeting a specific industry, even a segment of that industry, is what we would consider punitive and unfair tax policy. It is not going to get us increased energy security, increased employment, and it's certainly not going to lower the price of gasoline." Well, those very same words could be said about the ethanol debate we're having right now, because it would surely increase our energy insecurity, it would increase unemployment, and it's certainly not going to lower the price of gasoline. So it seems to me that the old saying about what's good for the goose ought to be good for the gander. What's good for a subsidy for petroleum and the people that defend that, why would you want the inconsistency that we're demonstrating here? Because this gets back to how I voted on that provision about a month ago. I voted that you ought to deal with oil and gas and ethanol and all those things in the same context, and make sure that they fit into an overall national energy policy. Now, in December 2010, Congress enacted this one-year extension of VTEC, V-E-T-C is the acronym, the Volumetric Ethanol Excise Tax Credit, also known as a blender's credit. We extended it for 1 year. That's what's being repealed in the Coburn Amendment. This one-year extension has allowed Congress and the domestic biofuels industry to determine the best path forward for federal support of biofuels and for the phasing out of that subsidy. As a result of these discussions, Senator Conrad and I introduced bipartisan legislation on May 4 that is a serious, responsible first step to reducing and redirecting federal tax incentives for ethanol. Our bill will reduce and phase out VTEC over a period of a few years. It also would extend through 2016 the alternative fuel refueling property credit, the cellulosic producer's tax credit, That deals with the second generation of ethanol from things other than grain, and the special depreciation allowance for cellulosic biofuel plant property. Earlier this week, I joined Senator Thune and Senator Klobuchar in introducing another bipartisan bill to immediately reduce and reform the ethanol tax incentive. It includes many of the same features as in the bill I introduced last month with Senator Conrad, but it enacts these reforms this year, right now, not phased out over a period of 5 years as my original bill did. Senator Thune's approach also leads to significant deficit reduction. The legislation we've introduced is a responsible approach that will reduce the existing blender's credit and put those valuable resources into investing in alternative fuel infrastructure, including alternative fuel pumps, or Senator Klobuchar used the term blender pumps. It would also make significant investments in advanced and cellulosic ethanol. That's the second generation of ethanol. That's where we want to go so that we're not using grain for fuel. It's a forward-looking bill that deserves widespread support. The Thune-Klobuchar bill, of which I'm a co-sponsor, will responsibly and predictably reduce the existing tax incentive and help get alternative fuel infrastructure in place so consumers can decide which fuels they prefer. We shouldn't pull the rug out from under this industry that has made these enormous investments. We need to provide a transition. I know that when American consumers have the choice, they'll choose domestically produced, clean, affordable, renewable fuel. They'll choose fuel from America's farmers and ranchers rather than from oil sheiks and foreign dictators. Both of the ethanol reform bills I mentioned are supported by the ethanol advocacy groups. In an almost unprecedented move, the ethanol industry is advocating for a reduction in their federal incentives. No other energy industry has come to the table to reduce or eliminate subsidies. No other energy lobby has come to me with a plan to reduce their federal support. And for sure, big oil hasn't come forward with any suggestions on reducing their subsidy. The best way to get deficit reduction that gets to the President's desk with a presidential signature is a responsible transition like the one offered by Senator Thune and Klobuchar. Otherwise, this exercise today and these two votes today is a waste of time. This vote will simply put many members of this body on record in support of a $2 4/10 billion tax increase. I would encourage those who want to reduce incentives and save taxpayers money to work with Senator Thune and Klobuchar and the rest of us on a responsible transition that has a chance of being enacted and, most importantly, signed by the President. I therefore urge my colleagues to oppose these two amendments. Now, I've always said that ethanol shouldn't be singled out, that it ought to be talked about in the context of an overall energy policy. Well, one of the reasons it's been able to be separated from all the rest of the alternative energy as well as from all the rest of our energy policies that we have for this country is because there's a great deal of ignorance about ethanol. And you can tell that in this town when you hear a lot of people pronounce the word ethanol, ethanol. Now, I want to refer to some of these things, and I'm going to use statements from the sponsor of the bill and refute some of these things that I think are really wrong. First one is we can save $3 billion if we eliminate the VTEX blending subsidy. Well, there are a lot of numbers thrown around about how much this incentive costs and how much Senator Coburn's amendment would save. I have a letter from the Joint Committee on Taxation with a score of Senator Coburn's amendment. The fact is, the amendment, if enacted on July the 1st, 2011, would increase revenue to the federal treasury by $2.4 billion, not $3 billion as the author has stated. Again, the Coburn Amendment, if enacted, would be saving $2.4 billion, and that's from the Joint Committee, and that's not my estimation. That's the estimation of the people that score for the Congress of the United States what impact various tax bills have. Another statement, quote, all the blenders of gasoline in the United States, all of them, have called and written and said, we do not want the $3 billion for the rest of the year. Well, I have a letter from the Society of Independent Gasoline Marketers of America, and they go by the acronym SIGMA, to Senate majority and minority leaders opposing efforts to prematurely and abruptly eliminate the blender's credit, contrary to the statement that I just read that all the blenders want to do away with this. The letter states, quote, as a leading marketers of ethanol-blended fuels at the retail level, SIGMA members and customers are the beneficiaries of VTAC. Simply put, SIGMA opposes recent moves to prematurely or abruptly end the subsidies without any consideration for future fuel or fuel delivery costs. To end this incentive immediately would no doubt result in an immediate spike in consumer fuel costs. End of quote from the Gasoline Marketers of America, the independent gasoline marketers of America. So I hope somebody will put that in their pipe and smoke it, because the fact that all of these people, we've been told here on the floor of the Senate, don't want this, well, that's an incorrect statement. Another statement is, quote, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 40% of last year's corn crop was utilized, converted to ethanol. Now, it is true that almost 40% of the corn crop went into the ethanol plant to produce ethanol. But what it doesn't tell you is that out of a 56-pound bushel of corn, there's 18 pounds of animal feed left over that is more efficient in fattening animals than even the original corn. And that's called dried distiller's grain. So I want people of this body not to come to me in their ignorance and tell me that you shouldn't use, that you're using too much corn for feed and saying it's 40% of the corn crop, when 18 pounds out of every 56-pound bushel of corn is for very efficient animal feed. And so I'm going to take credit for that 18 pounds and refute this statement that 40% of last year's corn crop was utilized and converted to ethanol. 1 bushel of corn produces nearly 3 gallons of ethanol and 18 pounds of high-value animal feed. In 2010, 4.65 billion bushels of corn were used to produce 13 billion gallons of ethanol. But ethanol production uses only the starch from the corn kernel. More than 1/3 or 1 4/10 billion bushels of dried distiller's grain is left over available as a high-value livestock feed. On a net basis, ethanol production used only 23% of the U.S. corn crop, far less than the 40% that Senator Coburn claims. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, feed use consumed 37% of the U.S. corn supply, much more than the 23% consumed by the ethanol production. The next statement that's incorrect. The American people ought to take into consideration when they go buy a gallon of fuel today, you already have $1.72 worth of subsidy in there. It does not have anything to do with oil and gas drilling. I believe Senator Coburn is referring to a report from the Congressional Budget Office. For the record, that report relied on a questionable assumption that only a tiny fraction of ethanol consumption is attributable to the ethanol tax credit. Regardless, I'm glad he raised this point about subsidies and oil and gas drilling. Our colleagues may be interested to learn of the hidden cost of our dependence upon foreign oil. And these are not my estimates. I'm going to give you references for you to look up. A peer review paper published in Environmental Magazine in July 2010 concluded that, quote, 27 to $138 billion is spent annually by the U.S. military for protection of the Middle Eastern maritime oil transit routes and oil infrastructure, with an average of $84 billion every year. Now, isn't it convenient to forget those costs of our national defense as keeping oil lines or oil lanes open so that we can get oil to the United States, that we spend $835 million every day to import oil? I'd like to refer to another one, Milton Copulus, an advisor to President Ronald Reagan, a veteran of the Heritage Foundation and head of the National Defense Council Foundation, testified before Congress in a recent year on, quote, the hidden cost, unquote, of imported oil. Mr. Copulus stated that by calculating oil supply disruptions and military expenditures, the hidden cost of U.S. dependence on petroleum would total up to $825 billion per year. The military expenditure is equivalent to adding $8.35 to the price of a gallon of gasoline refined from the Persian Gulf oil. There is no hidden, this is important about ethanol, because there is no hidden U.S. military cost attributable to homegrown, renewable, environmentally good ethanol. Here's another statement I'd like to refute. Quote, there is a big difference between a subsidy that is a tax credit and allowing someone to advance depreciation because they're going to write it off anyhow. The net effect of the federal government revenue, if you take all those away, is still zero. Now, that statement wants you to believe that all the tax benefits that the oil industry gets are just tax benefits. They're not a subsidy. Well, my response is that I have to refer to a September 2000 report by the Government Accountability Office, but that report concluded that the federal government has granted tax incentives, direct subsidies, and other support to the petroleum industry. They describe tax incentives as a federal tax provisions that grant special tax relief designed to encourage certain kinds of behavior by taxpayers or to aid taxpayers in special circumstances. According to the Government Accountability Office, the tax break allowing for the expensing of intangible drilling costs began in 1916. The percentage depletion allowance was enacted in 1926. The Government Accountability Office estimated that these two tax incentives led to a revenue loss of as much as $144 billion between the time studied by the Government Accountability Office, which goes from 1968 to when the report was given in the year 2000. Now, I would say to my colleagues that those figures I just gave you are a far cry from the zero revenue effect that Senator Coburn claims for the oil industry. These are Government Accountability Office words and figures. They refer to them as tax incentives that resulted in the loss of revenue more than $100 billion to the Federal Treasury over a 32-year period. I've heard Senator Coburn on the floor on many occasions talking about the dire fiscal situation our country's in. I find myself voting with Senator Coburn most of the time, but on this issue I disagree. Yet on this issue it sounds like he's arguing about semantics. One is a subsidy, yet the other is a legitimate business expense. In other words, in the case of ethanol, it's a subsidy. In the case of big oil and their taxes, it's a legitimate business expense. I'm not sure that this argument over terminology will give our children and grandchildren much comfort when they're picking up a trillion-dollar tab over the next couple of decades. The last statement I would like to refute is this, quote, corn prices are $7.65. Now, that had to be a couple days ago because I get a report every day on corn prices, and at my local elevator in New Hartford, Iowa, they were $7.10 yesterday. But let me quote again. Corn prices are $7.65 a bushel. They're 2.5 times what they were 3.5 years ago. Ethanol has been this last year the significant driver. Let me suggest here, first of all, that he's right. 2.5 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, corn was about $7. But 6 months later, it was $3.58. So anybody that thinks corn's going to stay at this historically high price isn't very smart, and if farmers are spending money according to that, they better slow up, because they're going to be caught off guard and out of business like they were in the 1980s. So this is my response, in addition to what I just said about corn going down to $3.58. Grain used for ethanol accounts for approximately 3% of the world's coarse grain. Now let me reflect on that statement for a minute, because you get the opinion when they say 40% of U.S. corn is used in ethanol, you get the opinion that, ye gods, what are people going to eat? But worldwide, and the grain market is worldwide, the global marketplace decides the price of grain. And worldwide, only 3% of the coarse grain, and corn's one of the coarse grains, is used for fuel. And because of the increased corn production, the amount of grain available for non-ethanol use is growing. In the year 2000, there was 2.4 billion metric tons of grain available for uses other than ethanol, even with the growth of the ethanol industry. Last year, there was 2.6 billion metric tons of grain available for uses other than ethanol. It's also important to review the cost of corn in retail food prices. Corn price today, the corn cost in a gallon of milk is about 46 cents. The cost of corn in a pound of chicken is 34 cents. 1 pound of beef takes 92 cents worth of corn. 1 pound of pork requires 39 cents. So you have all this excuse coming from the food manufacturers of the United States that ethanol is the cause of food prices rising. But you can see in the figures I just gave you that what the farmer gets out of a dollar worth of retail food is about 21 cents. And you could cut this in half, and it'll be cut in half like it was 3.5 years ago. But when the price of corn goes down, you aren't going to see big food reducing their cost of food by 20%, because they need ethanol as a scapegoat to raise the price of food. Now, that's all I have to say about ethanol. But I do have an amendment that I'm introducing to this bill that's before us that's unrelated to ethanol, but it also brings up the same point, that there's a lot of places in this budget we can save money. And Senator Johnson of South Dakota and I are introducing this amendment that pertains to setting limits that any one farmer, including this farmer, can get from farm program payments. I've been pushing for reform of farm program payments for many years. Some folks from outside of Iowa unfamiliar with this issue may be surprised that I am the member who keeps pushing these reforms. They may think that Iowa's economy relies heavily on agriculture. Why would a senator from a farm state like Iowa want a hard cap on farm payments? But Iowa farmers understand why I continue pushing for a hard cap. This is about making sure that farm programs provide what they're supposed to provide, a safety net for those who need it. And basically, farmers that have the economic incapability of overcoming natural disasters and political issues and international politics that they have no control over that affects the impact of farm income. Those are small and medium-sized farmers. They aren't these mega farmers that are 10% of the farmers getting 70% of the benefits out of the farm program. These small and medium-sized farmers, as of course bigger farmers do, play a vital role in supplying our nations and world with food. However, they're continually, as small farmers, faced with challenging of rising land prices and cash rents. Many times, young and beginning farmers can't compete because of high land prices and rent. There is no doubt the rise in commodity prices is part of the reason for higher land prices and cash rents. But currently, farm program payments are also placing upward pressure on land prices. This is not how it's supposed to work, because what I just said means is that we're subsidizing big farmers to get bigger. Now, there's nothing wrong with big farmers getting bigger. I don't argue with that in any segment of our economy. But we shouldn't be subsidizing big farmers to get bigger. The farm program was put in place to provide a safety net for farmers. It's meant to help them get through tough times. The farm program was not created to help big farmers get bigger. And let me repeat for you, because it can't get enough emphasis, 10% of this nation's largest farmers receive 70% of the farm program payments. These large farms do not need these program payments to get through tough times. And small and medium-sized farmers don't need non-market factors driving up land prices and cash rent. This bill is a common-sense solution to this problem. Reform the farm program so it works as a true safety net for those it was intended for. We can do that by placing limits on how much a single farm operation can receive in program payments. The government should stay out of subsidizing the growth of large farms. In addition, this amendment tightens the requirement for people to be considered an actively engaged farmer. For too long, people have gamed the system and received farm payments that the law did not intend. There have been a number of amendments introduced to the EDA bill before us in the name of saving taxpayers' dollars. And the ethanol amendment, supposedly that's one of the motives behind it. By setting hard payment caps and making these reforms, we will save the U.S. Treasury approximately $1.5 billion over 10 years. The headlines around here are dominated by the problems of the budget. Many of my colleagues have come to this floor in recent weeks and discussed that government spending and the big debt. If this body is going to be serious about cutting spending, then this amendment that I'm laying before you as a limitation on farm payments is a continuation of that effort. Instead of spending time debating the merits of programs that assist the renewable energy industry, an industry that, by the way, helps us wean ourselves off of our need for foreign oil, why don't we agree to make cuts in areas we should be able to have an agreement to. This is a simple and common-sense way for us to save money while at the same time making sure the farm program accomplishes what it's supposed to. I yield the floor.